All right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down the Cold War, that massive 45-year conflict that pretty much defined the entire second half of the 20th century. You know, it's a standoff that really shaped the world we're all living in right now. So picture this. World War II ends, and you think, great, peace at last. But nope. The world's biggest superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, who were actually allies during the war, suddenly found themselves locked in this new kind of battle. It wasn't a hot war, with armies clashing directly. Instead, it was this tense, decades-long struggle over ideas, money, and global influence. Okay, so first up, let's talk about how the end of World War II, instead of leading to lasting peace, actually just split the entire world right down the middle, creating this brand new global standoff. And just like that, the world split into two teams. You had the United States and its allies, the Western Bloc, all about capitalism and individual freedom. And on the other side, you had the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, pushing communism and state control. And look, this was way more than just a disagreement over economics. We're talking about two completely opposite ideas for how an entire society should run. You've probably heard the phrase Iron Curtain, right? That was Winston Churchill. He perfectly captured how Europe was just sliced in two. It was like a giant wall separating two totally different worlds. And because of this deep division, two huge military alliances popped up. NATO, led by the US, and the Warsaw Pacts, led by the Soviets. The lines were officially drawn in the sand. All right, so moving on, let's get into how this cold standoff was constantly, and I mean constantly, on the verge of turning into a full-blown, world-ending hot war. And nowhere was this division more obvious than in the city of Berlin. I mean, it became the ultimate symbol. First, there was the Soviet blockade in '48. Then, in 1961, they built the Berlin Wall, a literal physical wall splitting the city. But the fear really peaked during these flashpoint moments, these major crises that brought the entire planet right to the brink of nuclear war. And let's talk about the big one, the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days, just think about that, 13 days in October 1962, the world held its breath. We were closer than we have ever been to complete nuclear annihilation. The U.S. found Soviet missiles in Cuba, just off the coast of Florida, and it kicked off this incredibly tense standoff. It was only ended by secret back-channel deals, a seriously scary, close call that showed everyone just how dangerous this whole thing was. So this competition, it wasn't just about who had more tanks or soldiers. It was this intense battle for bragging rights, really. Who was better? It was a race for technological superiority, for scientific breakthroughs, and for proving which ideology was the best. And at the heart of it all was the nuclear arms race. Both sides knew that if they launched an attack, the other would fire back and everyone would be destroyed. They actually called this mutually assured destruction, or get this, MAD. It's a pretty fitting acronym, right? This created this really weird, super fragile, and absolutely terrifying kind of peace, all while they were building thousands and thousands of nukes, enough to blow up the entire planet many times over. Then there was the space race. This was a huge part of the propaganda war. And honestly, the Soviets got off to a shocking start. They launched Sputnik, the first satellite, and then sent Yuri Gagarin, the first man, into space. This was a massive shock to the US, a real blow to their pride. But as we all know, America poured everything into catching up and eventually claimed the ultimate prize, landing the first humans on the moon in 1969. So, you might be asking yourself, if both sides were so terrified of nuclear war, how did they actually fight? Well, that's the thing. They didn't fight each other directly. Instead, they got other countries to do the fighting for them. This is where the Cold War got really hot. They fought through what are called proxy wars all over the world. Basically, the US and the Soviets would pick opposing sides in a local conflict or a civil war and just pour in weapons, money, and support, turning these places into international battlegrounds. And these wars were devastating. In places like Korea and Vietnam, millions of people died as the superpowers used these conflicts as a chessboard to stop the other's ideology from spreading. And later on, in Afghanistan, the roles were reversed. The Soviets invaded, and the US backed the local resistance fighters, dragging the USSR into its own horrible, costly war. These weren't just side stories. These proxy wars were the deadliest, most brutal parts of the entire Cold War. So after all these decades of tension, the end of the Cold War happened surprisingly fast. It kind of took everyone by surprise. So let's take a look at how the Soviet Union, this seemingly unstoppable superpower, just crumbled from the inside out. It really was a perfect storm, you know? The Soviet economy was in shambles, totally crushed by the insane cost of the arms race. The war in Afghanistan was a disaster, a total mess. And then a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, comes in and tries to fix things with these big reforms, perestroika for the economy and glasnost for more openness. But, well, these changes kind of opened a Pandora's box, unleashing forces that he just couldn't put back. And then came the big moment, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. That was it. That was the symbol that the Iron Curtain was finally coming down. It set off this incredible chain reaction all across Eastern Europe. One by one, the communist governments fell, and just 2 years later, the Soviet Union itself was officially gone, just dissolved. So the end of the Cold War wasn't just, the end of a long fight. It was the beginning of a whole new chapter in world history, a pretty uncertain one, actually. And it left the United States as the world's one and only superpower, totally changing the global political map. So, when you look back on all of this, what's the big takeaway? After 45 years of this insane struggle, what was the one thing that really brought the Cold War to an end? Was it economic power? Was it military might? Or was it just the power of ordinary people demanding freedom? It's definitely something to think about.